And welcome, everyone. This is the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we have a great show lined up for you all today. But before we get into it, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this week. If you do like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server, as well as some extra content, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. We also now have a TCG player affiliate link, so go ahead, and that is in the description as well. If you want to help support the show, you can click on that, and we'd really appreciate that. Today, we are going to be taking a look at another installment in our Brewer's Choice series. Our patrons voted on a few options, and they all landed on Tergrid. I forget the other one. It's Tergrid, God of Fright. So joining me this week to share with us their builds of Tergrid is, of course, my good friend Cobblepott. Cobble, how you doing?
Doing good. Good to be here.
Awesome. Fenix is also joining us here from Lincoln. Fenix, how are you doing?
Doing good. Ready to share some spice.
Oh yeah, we've got some spicy stuff today, and not just your food, right?
Yeah.
We also have hailing from Canada is our good friend Spleenface. Spleen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Good. So we one of our patron rewards is that you guys can help us pick out a topic for a show, specifically the Brewer's Choice episodes. So we gave our patrons an option between a few of the gods from what is it, Kaldheim, and everybody landed on Tergrid, God of Fright. So this was one of the ones that I think that people were very interested in, and especially in our group, were very, very excited to get to work on this. And so, you know, Cobble, you've got everybody's got really interesting. So if you recall, so the first time we did this with Kodama and who was the other one? It was
Vial
Kodama
Smasher.
and Vial Smasher.
Yep.
Everybody's lists, like, there were some key differences and things played very differently, right? But all three of you, like, everybody had like some core key cards that were very similar. And you still have this and this, but all three of you have gone in how I feel are very different directions with it. And so I'm really excited to get to showcase these. So starting off, like, Cobble, like, we're looking at your deck, like going over the high level of the game plan for this. What are we looking at with this?
So most Tergrid decks, I think, just by nature of the commander, are going to have some sort of synergy or some sort of focus on extracting as much value as they can out of, just being able to take opponents' permanents and leverage them kind of against your and create this snowball effect. So I think regardless of the details, like the nuances of the tack that you take in exacting that plan, everyone is going to be wanting to have discard effects. Everyone's going to be wanting to have sacrifice effects and those kinds of things to take advantage of that value. By nature of some of the limitations that you have in mono black, namely not a lot of stack-based interaction, the list is going to tend towards being proactive. So it's going to be permanent oriented for the most part. And, it's going to largely often play kind of a stacks game. You can play mid-range as well. And the list is going to tend also towards being parasitic. And what that means is that it's largely going to reflect the table texture of whatever game you're playing, because a lot of your a lot of your game pieces that you're going to be extracting are going to be the game pieces that your opponents are playing. So the games are going to, I think, have a lot of variance of kind of the details of how things play out, just because the things that you're extracting from your opponents are going to be wildly different from game to game.
So as like to contrast this against a deck that some might say is extraordinarily linear, like Rograk, what's it? The black. Why am I blanking so hard? The black blue partner. Silas, yeah. These are a very linear deck. Like most of your games are going to look very similar. This is going to be, every game is going to look a little bit or look different. You're not going to see similar lines, right?
So like what'll happen is, most of these decks are going to play hand disruption. They're going to play a lot of discard effects. They're going to play, pox effects and smokestack kind of effects and that kind of thing. And that's kind of the similarity that you're the common thread that you're going to see through, I think, all implementations, because everybody wants to be, taking advantage of the power that Tergrid has in the command zone. But that's kind of where the railroadiness kind of ends, because what that imparts is that, as you're pulling dockside extortionists from your opponents and, mystic remoras from your opponents and hull breachers from your opponents and so on, it really forces you to kind of think on your feet to how do you incorporate these pieces that are like outside of Black's identity into the game plan, and how do you use them effectively against your opponents? And that makes the deck really kind of like rich in the experience that you get out of it, because you're going to be getting different things out of every different table. So that parasiticness means that its effectiveness is going to kind of be wildly variant, but the experience is also going to be wildly variant. So it winds up being a really fun deck to pilot. I don't know.
It's very funny because for me, when you say parasitic and you use that description, to me it makes me feel like this is a bad thing, right? But like what you're describing, to clarify, is that this is a deck that relies on the other decks at the table for how well it's going to perform, correct?
Yes. And it certainly will perform much better against certain types of table textures. So if you have Tergrid and 3 Turbonaws lists, your chances are you might not have time to get yourself set up, and there's a chance that nobody else is going to be playing the mid-range role, or nobody else is going to be playing another Stax role, and you just might not be able to stop one of those 3 decks from being able to go off, just by nature of the fact that you don't have a lot of stack-based interaction. But on the other hand, if you wind up getting yourself into a grindy game where there's more mid-range or stacks in play, then all of a sudden you wind up having a much higher percentage chance of succeeding in those circumstances. So it's parasitic in the more, let's say, the more proactive the decks that you're going to play against are going to greatly improve your chances of succeeding at the table.
Okay. So when we look at so your list specifically, Cobble, you're playing, a lot of hand disruption. I know, like, the last handful of decks that you've kind of been making have kind of had this Chains of Mephistopheles engine within them. And, this one also has probably one of my more favorite Stax effects in Possess Portal. And so, explain some of what's going on as far as what your deck is going to be doing.
Okay, so my deck in specific, and I'm going to guess it shares a lot of qualities with Fenix and Spleenface, is that you want to start off as early as you can. You want to be getting disruption down onto the table. You want to be slowing the velocity of your opponent's play, and you're going to achieve that by having Stax effects that Sphere of Resistance, Thorn of Amethyst, those types of taxing effects. But this list, because of the fact that we want to extract value from Tergrid with discard that's going to kind of like push us towards wanting to have a lot of discard effects. So that's Chains of Mephistopheles in specific is a really, really good effect, even outside of, devoted discard, just because it, makes it such that a lot of the draw engines that people are hoping to execute on are just kind of nullified, or they're made, significantly worse. If you're looking at like wheel effects, for instance, that are very popular, but they just aren't going to have the effect that anybody wants at all. And when you have kind of the macro effect of, well, this shuts off the exploits that people are trying to do, and also have kind of the micro effect of this is going to also tax them in the small, like when they're trying to draw just like a second card. Oh, they've got a Crown, and they're not allowed to choose not to draw that second, that extra card. Now they have to do a discard before they can do a draw, and then that's going to give you value out of it. So Chains is going to be great. Oppression is just a great card for hand control, because again, so many of the lists in the metagame are completely predicated on this assumption that they'll be able to have high card velocity and be able to cast multiple spells per turn. And it really makes it almost impossible for most combos to be executed, and especially, like stormy kind of combos to be executed where you're forced to discard a card every single time you cast a spell.
Would you say that it's a little oppressive?
Oh, yes, it is. Underworld Breach.
I'm going to head out.
Underworld Breach, I would say, is the one that gets to skirt that, because they're fine with, if you got all of your cards in your graveyard, then you can. It doesn't mean that you have to have a card to discard in order to cast spells. So that would be an impressive ability.
Though that being said, Tergrid definitely does a good job of hating on Underworld Breach naturally, right? Because typically you're trying to generate mana by sacrificing something, and so Tergrid will just yoink that. If you crack a Lion's Eye Diamond, you're not going to have a good time.
Exactly. And Dockside too. A lot of people who are doing Underworld Breach are going to want to, sacrifice their Dockside so they can cast it again out of the yard and that kind of thing. And again, this, having a Tergrid in play, just the Tergrid herself just stops a lot of combos kind of in their tracks as well.
Yeah.
So, so you want to disrupt early. You want to kind of because. And the reason why you want to disrupt early is because you're in mono black. You don't have that stack-based interaction, so it's not like you can be sure that you can hold up mana and stop somebody from casting Oracle or whatever and be able to interact with that. So rather than being interactive, you got to be proactive. So you want to get those things down kind of as early as you can, and then once you're able to accelerate into having, Tergrid in play, that's really when you want to kind of seal the deal with something like Smokestack, Pox, Possessed Portal, these kind of bigger effects that are just really, really oppressive effects on their own, but when coupled with Tergrid, so like if you have Tergrid and Possessed Portal, it's just extremely difficult for opponents to be able to get out of that situation. Possessed Portal is one of these cards where it's cards that trigger on every upkeep or every end step. A lot of people will misread the first time they read it because they think that it's yours. Possessed Portal is one of those. Every single end of turn, everybody has to either discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. And normally what happens is you don't have any great ways, unless you're like a token strategy or something like that. You don't have a lot of great ways to break parity with this. So the person who controls the Possessed Portal eventually needs to sacrifice it, because they just, you're going to run out of cards in hand and you're going to run out of permanents in play to be able to kind of maintain this broken parity with the rest of the people. In this particular case, having Tergrid and Possessed Portal, for instance, I mean, you're potentially getting 3 permanents every time you sack one.
Right.
And that makes it much easier to be able to just completely wait it out. And it only, I mean, if you look at, you know, a turn cycle, that's potentially 12 permanents that you have claimed, and everybody else has, you know, gone down 4 permanents or, you know, 4 cards in hand or whatever. So it's really, really powerful, and it's kind of where you want to get your deck postured kind of as soon as you can.
Right.
I can't believe I'm about to say this based on what you just said, but I actually think you're kind of underselling Possessed Portal here. Like, the way I see it, Possessed Portal is that you actually just win the game if you have a Possessed Portal and Tergrid, because essentially you just get to go, you are, initially at least, you'll be amassing resources as you're probably going to be getting more than 1 permanent per turn cycle.
Right.
And then you could just let the Possessed Portal go when your opponents have no cards in play and no cards in hand, and you have all the permanents they had in play and whatever permanents were in their hand. Like, that seems like game over, not, oh, it's an insane value swing. It actually just ends the game.
Right. It's like you started the game over with Karn, you know, like...
yeah, exactly.
But, like, way better. So it's absurd. And one of the things, too, just to note, Mystic Remora, you know, speaking of being parasitic, Mystic Remora is one of the greatest sights to see. And it's one of those things when people, you know, have never played against Tergrid before, they're like, okay, I'm just going to play a Mystic Remora. And then, like, there's this moment when they realize,
oh,
like,
no.
as soon as I let go of this, it's going to go straight to the Tergrid player. That also winds up being a big part of your plan is extracting the value engines from your opponents. And you really want to, you know, kind of be thoughtful about helping your opponents to part with the things that they have more quickly. You know, some things are just going to, you know, they'll naturally have to sacrifice things depending on kind of the hate pieces you put into play. But, you know, using your removal judiciously can help pull those things over onto your side kind of earlier than people expected, and then you can start making use of those value pieces.
Right.
I'm gonna be honest, given that we're not playing Dorks, I don't know if I can get behind, I hope my opponents open with Mystic Remora. That might be a bridge too far for me. Obviously it is very good to steal, but I think that this deck can certainly suffer from, like, you might have to feed them more cards than you're comfortable with if you don't want to just fall behind in the game.
Right, for sure.
So, you know, we've heard a little bit about the general idea of what's going on with Cobble's deck Fenix. What's kind of the overall, you know, I know your list, you know, everybody has a lot of overlap, but, you know, like I said at the beginning, is everybody kind of went in different directions. So Fenix, like, what's the direction that you went with your deck?
Yeah, I'm glad Cobble talked a lot about what a parasitic deck is, because I found the same issue when I was building it, and instead of trying to make up with the shortcomings of that, I just leaned all the way into it. And so I am playing a bunch of fast mana and trying to get Tergrid out and just hope that that's enough to not lose the game. If people stop Tergrid, I'm playing what I would describe as a mid-range monstrosity of just extremely high-value stuff like Villas and stuff like Bolas' Citadel that just generate insane amounts of value the longer a game goes.
Right.
And so we don't necessarily, and what I mean by parasitic in this case is that I'm not going to necessarily be the deck that leads to the game being grindy. I'll do my best, but our tools are limited. And so when the game does get to that grindy spot, we're in such a extremely advantageous position that it's almost impossible for most decks to come back from.
And
yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I see we're all on Trinisphere, but I noticed you didn't play any of the other spheres in your deck. So I guess that certainly I see what you mean by leaning into rather than playing, because admittedly the tools in Mono Black to extend the game are limited. Like, we don't have Rule of Laws, and we're missing some other types of hate that appear in other colors. But
Trinisphere is a rule of law, isn't it?
So
Kind of. But, like, we're all playing Trinisphere, but both Cobble and I put in Sphere of Resistance and Thorn of Amethyst as well. And I noticed you didn't. So I guess that's an interesting... You just kind of accepted that rather than play underwhelming things to try and extend the game, just lean into somebody else helping you extend the
Exactly.
game.
And that's exactly what I mean by it's definitely the most parasitic out of all of the decks that we have here. It's if somebody else doesn't stop the game from ending and Tergrid isn't the thing that's going to stop the game from ending, I probably don't have an answer for it. And
right. So
being
it's going to
okay with
see
that.
more variance, like we were talking about before, depending on the table texture. So if the table texture is all turbo, then you're going to have a worse time in that case.
Yeah,
You're going to have a
gonna
bad time.
100%.
So, okay, so I need to interrupt for a second and go mildly off topic. And because I want to share what's going on in my apartment.
Mildly.
Well, it's very off topic, but I want to share what's going on in my apartment right now because we have a lot of pizza. So my
Weird flex,
Is this
but
mono
okay.
black pizza?
no, so my fiance ordered us dinner, and we like get the same thing from like Pizza Hut every time, so we have like saved in, and there was like some issue she said where like Pizza Hut said they couldn't like fulfill the order or whatever. So she's like, okay, whatever. So she ordered Domino's instead. Well, Pizza Hut delivered. And then we also got Domino's delivered. So we have like 4 pizzas out there.
Wow.
So I'm just Cassidy
Does
just
that mean
walks
that
in
and are you just gonna eat it, or
I mean, yeah.
I mean,
I'll probably eat some tonight and then box some up. I know this is super off topic, but I'm like sitting here. Cassidy literally brought in an entire pizza and breadsticks because there's like 4 more out there.
you see on Twitter, like people post pictures of themselves like in a bathtub filled with, like magic cards and stuff like that. I'm picturing you right now, like just covered in pizza.
That I've had something similar.
I'm here
happen
for
to
it.
me something similar happened to me in the past where we ordered pizza. They got the wrong address. They swapped like road and street, so then they sent it from the wrong place. And then we're like, oh, I guess it's not coming. So we like ordered pizza again, and then the company fixed it. They're like, okay, we'll dispatch your order from the right place. We're like, shit, well, we already ordered more pizza. And not only that, but the driver that took it to the wrong place also then brought it. So we wound up with triple pizza.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm sorry to take us off topic for a second, but I just
Now I'm hungry.
I'm sitting here at my
always on top.
I'm sitting here at my desk with a pizza, and I'm just like a whole pizza, and I'm just like, all right.
Must be nice.
Oh my goodness.
How do I hold all these pizzas?
So anyway, sorry to take us off there for a second. So Fenix is the most parasitic one at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm the
Phoenix
worst.
I feel like we're doing like a Family Guy
I
thing
feel
where it
like-
just does a cutaway and now we're back. So
I feel like this proves that Callahan's the most parasitic one at the table. Phoenix, you're off the hook.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
Spleenface, tell us about your deck.
yeah. So yours, you went a little bit faster than everybody else. I feel like you're in a more of everybody. I feel like you're playing the most proactive strategy.
I guess in some ways. I definitely skimped on some of the fast mana that plays particularly poorly with the stacks that we're running. So like I'm not running I think you're both running Cabal Ritual. I steered clear of that and things like Lotus Petal because I've cast Lotus Petals into Thorn of Amethyst too many times to want them in the same deck. But yeah, so I don't think I did anything sort of particularly crazy. The one thing that I guess the one like sort of, well, maybe I'll save that until we talk about the win conditions. But I definitely went a little bit harder on the discard effects. So I'm running, we're all running. Oh no, we're not all running Necrogen Mists. Never mind. I thought we were, but we're all running. At the very least, we're all running Oppression. But so I'm running Necrogen Mists, Bottomless Pit,
Words of
the
Waste.
creature one, Cunning Lethomancer, and yeah, Words of Waste, and then a couple of the ETB, each opponent discards things, as well as some of the sorceries that just make everyone discard a bunch of cards. Because I was sort of thinking about, I basically wasn't sure that it's enough to only force people to discard a couple cards, because, you might get a land from someone, like they discard their like worst piece of interaction and a land or something like that. And then it's pretty underwhelming. So I was definitely trying to focus on like getting people to not just a low resource state, but basically a no resource state, whether that's being hellbent or like not having any, lands. I notice, I guess Fenix is running it, but Cobble, you're not. I also put in Death Cloud. We're all running pox and smallpox, but I went deeper on that too. And essentially the idea is to try and get people to the point where they actually have nothing, more or less, rather than, sort of... Because I felt that if you're just sort of, cleaning up around the edges and, like, you've made people discard a couple cards, you'll very often find that people, when they see that they're not going to be able to keep their cards for a long period of time, they discard all their interaction and protection and make a win attempt.
Right.
And because we're in mono black, we just don't have the tools to stop that a lot of the time. So I wanted to, I wanted to sort of avoid that situation by like much more quickly getting the combo cards out of people's hands rather than sort of doing it slowly and allowing them the chance to try and make their attempts.
Right. That's a good insight, is that a lot of times, these effects where, people discard a card, especially where it's a card of their own choice. A lot of times you don't see those in CEDH just because they're not a big enough effect to really have an impact, especially with, all the card advantage that you see in the metagame. And the choices of the cards that people choose to get rid of when, they don't want to put themselves in a state where they can't win, where they're going to hold on to their like combo pieces or whatever and discard interaction or whatever to be able to preserve that, helps us to be able to kind of break parity with the fact that we aren't able to interact on the stack. And it helps us to be able to make the game more about permanence and make the game more proactive. And I think that's a good insight.
So as we're kind of moving on here and we're looking at, win cons, we talked a little bit about how, Possessed Portal with Tergrid can just kind of win the game. But if we look outside of that, because, you're not going to be able to do that every game necessarily.
Just watch me.
Because you said that,
hard enough.
because you said that, you have to play this on the gameplay series now, or Team Turn 3.
I refuse. I absolutely refuse.
So Cobble, what are your, win cons with this list?
So I wanted to make sure that I had at least one way that I could use Tergrid herself as the win con. And this is not the, you couple her with a Possessed Portal and then say I win. So I am running Mikaeus the Unhallowed and Gravecrawler with Phyrexian Altar to generate infinite black mana, because it gives Gravecrawler a Undying ability, so you can sacrifice it twice each loop. And then you can sacrifice Tergrid and then play her Lantern side and then pump all the black mana into the Lantern and burn out the table. That frees you up from needing to have kind of like the original incarnation that I tried of the list had like Aetherflux Reservoir and some kind of like faster kind of combo sort of wins. And on the one hand, they're really hard to execute through kind of all the disruption, the Stax elements that we're playing. And two, when your first priority is to just like make sure you're disrupting the opponents every game early, you want to get disruption down. Having a combo piece in hand, it feels really bad because it's kind of like keeping you really don't want to see it. So by eliminating kind of devoted combo pieces from the list entirely, that helps you kind of turn the knob on that signal to noise ratio of making sure that really everything you have is disruption.
So I have a question about this. Sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, you're fine.
So why? Well, I suppose I know the real reason. Because you want to integrate Tergrid and her backside and like the elements.
I'm all about Tergrid's backside.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
And you said that, and it made me think of the scene in Avengers Endgame where Ant-Man calls Captain America's ass America's ass. That's what it made me think of.
That is America's ass.
But so when I initially looked at this and I saw that you were running Mikaeus, my initial thought was, why no walking ballista?
I mean, yeah, we could do that. It's again, that so it, each there's I could say that you could make a convincing argument that it should be in there, and given the fact that you've got Tergrid in the command zone, I feel like it's unnecessary, because if you've got the outlet in the command zone, that frees you from having the outlet in the 99. And I could see, the argument, oh, what if someone, Gilded Drakes your Tergrid, now what are you going to do because you can't win, that kind of thing. And for that reason, we've got multiple ways to win that don't require Tergrid. I just wanted to include one that did.
But I guess, yeah. So
and that makes sense.
It certainly depends on how much value you're getting. Like, I think Walking Ballista is pretty clearly a better card than Gravecrawler.
This is true. Now, for what it's worth.
So, Alter versus Viscera Seer or Carrion Feeder is, it's certainly much more contextual, I would say.
Right. So, looking at each of these cards. So, Mikaeus allows you to get multiple kind of hits off of your things like Plague Crafter and, other creatures. It also lets you kind of get a second crack at taking creatures from your opponents.
Also not Plague Crafter specifically, but Plague Crafter's a human, but...
Oh, you're right. Okay, yes. But Gravecrawler also is good for... There's times when, you have to sacrifice a creature, or it's nice to have something to sacrifice, and being able to kind of like cast it out of your graveyard and then sacrifice it and then cast it out of your graveyard again, and have something that's low impact where you're not losing traction to something like a smokestack or whatever. Yes, I get that's tenuous, but I've had times when that has been useful. Phyrexian Altar is, I think, normally useful because, there's times that you really don't care about the creatures that you've pulled from your opponents. Like if you're getting Arbor Elf, you're not going to be able to make use of that, really.
Oh, man. Arbor Elf is 10 out of 10 hit off a Tergrid.
So being able to just kind of feed a couple of creatures that you've stolen from your opponents for, 4 or 5 black mana so that you can put another hate piece into play. I mean, it's... it's not these aren't cards that are, they've got kind of this single use and it, functionally fixed on this one use case, and that's all that they're good for. There's kind of a diversity of lines that you can pull from them depending on the context.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that you might, could potentially go badly is with Mikaeus, anything you've stolen, if it gets killed, your opponents do get it back, which is maybe not ideal, but
right. But then you can get it back again.
Only if you make them sacrifice it, right?
Right.
I was just thinking, all Assassin's Trophy my Dockside Extortionist that you have, and then I get another Dockside
that is true. That is a side effect, and that might be enough to say, you know what, I think Blood Chief Ascension on its own is fine, and I don't need to have like an infinite mana outlet to win with Tergrid. Just do the attrition game. Mm-hmm. But if we had more time to explore the lists, over time, because it's still a very, very new commander, I'm sure some of those kind of nuances will shake themselves out.
I know what you're talking about. Clearly, we've solved it. We're done. Everyone can pack up and go home.
Yeah, we have the template for Tergrid right here, obviously.
Perfect.
I mean, it's a lot of Tergrid lists are going to be very similar, and I don't think that there's new technology that's going to come down, I'm sure, that will shed light on new things that we can do with it. But I think the core engine for startup is going to be very similar across kind of all Tergrid lists.
So,
oh man, I'm pretty sure Turbo Nas is the only good archetype you can play, right? So
that's it. Fenix, so we're looking at yours. Yours has a little bit of a different way of going about things. Although yours looks like it's a little bit more similar to Spleenface's in this regard. So what are your win cons?
Other than the Tergrid plus Possessed Portal, I basically don't have any. We have Villas, we have Tiny Bones, we have Bolus's Citadel. We have ways to deal damage to kill our opponents, but generally it's just the epitome of what I said earlier, which is a mid-range monstrosity. I'm drawing cards in my deck and making opponents sacrifice and discard things, and kind of just sitting there with a table hopefully full of their win cons, value engines, things like that. And then I have Praetor's Grasp as my big backup, and that's about it.
This is like 4-color Rashmi, but like worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a Vile Smasher in my command zone to actually kill you eventually. I do have stuff like Tiny Bones where I could like activate it maybe on like turn 7, turn 8. It depends on how many lands I get from people. But if somebody Gilded Drake's Tergrid in my list, it's you kind of sit there and look at your hand and
you're like, well, good game.
There are definitely a lot of things people can do to these decks to make them sad. That's a bit of a given, being usually outside of blue.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of ways to actually beat tables to death over the course of a long game. There's Bone Miser, Waste Not, things. This deck that I have at least has a lot of things that CEDH decks struggle to deal with, such as just having a Bone Miser and maybe a discard for everybody at the table every turn where I'm just generating value. And it's just something that people can't come back from. Villas, if you can get a Villas out, most CDH tables can't deal with a Villas if they don't have removal in hand. And you'll just get there by drawing half of your deck for no reason
all of the cards. Just
other than Villas is great.
All of them. How many cards do you draw? Yes.
Unless there's a Possessed Portal in play.
Correct. So getting to you, Spleenface, you kind of feel like you're more of a mixture as far as your win cons go between you're not really running a dedicated win con, but you do have like Blood Chief Ascension. You are the only one doing the Marlin and the opposition agent combo. So kind of go into some of your win cons there.
Yeah, so like Fenix, I'm running Praetor's Grasp, and also I believe Demonic Consultation, so you can sort of assemble somebody else's Oracle combo if you're really desperate. But the sort of the closest thing to a combo I would say that I'm running is the Morale Opposition Agent Lockout, and basically the reason I'm running that, and it's also one of the reasons I'm running Varigoth, is that his name? Varigoth.
The Boast guy?
Sire, the Boast Vampiric Tutor guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was in part that to me, the idea of getting a tutor down before making everyone hellbent was like very appealing. But basically I've found, and in part that experience comes from playing Gitrog last weekend, that outside of blue, just putting a lot of effort into landing specifically opposition agent very early does an insane amount of work. So, like, in my mind, one of the most common early tutor targets for this deck is opposition agent. And given, that we also have reanimates to get it back into play, that it seemed that Morillon was, like, less effort than you might expect, because I don't look at it as sort of assembling an A+B combo. It's like opposition agent is a card that I'm actively going for as part of my game plan, so then once I have that, it's actually only one card that I have to find to turn that into, like, a win.
Right. And it's very interesting because, the Varigoth has an interesting synergy with opposition agent because it is target player searches their library, not you. Yeah. So you can take other people's stuff, and also you get it instantly because Varigoth puts it on top, but opposition agent puts it in exile. Right.
So you can instantly tutor stuff from other people's decks and then have access to it right away.
Right.
That's just a good feeling.
Yeah, it really, honestly, opposition agent, and we've talked about this somewhat before, but I remember,
it's actually a pretty good card.
Yeah, well, back in November when...
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Back in November when we were, like, talking about this card, there was a lot of hyperventilation about this card and whether or not it was going to, like, ruin games and you're never going to fetch and all this stuff. And what's really turned out is it's honestly been fine for the format, in my opinion. I think it's actually
disagree.
I think it's been all right, but I don't know. That's my opinion.
It's all right when it only starts coming down late in turn 2, but when it comes down before that, it just highlights. It's one of the things that highlights turn order issues.
Right.
That makes sense.
Just opening turn 1 land crypt opposition agent. It's like, oh, well, you kept a hand with fetch lands? It sucks to be you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a fair point. But I mean, I don't think it's an outlandish thing to say that it is not nearly as broken in half as some people were worried about. And, the card that ended up being broken in half was its counterpart, the Hull Breacher.
I think we're still waiting for that moment when people start to run more interaction and play their tutors more thoughtfully. And right now, we haven't gotten there yet, and people are just, oh, well, that sucked. There was an opposition agent really early, and we'll just move on to the next game. And there will be a point when I think that there'll be some course correction, and we'll see some changes in kind of the mentality that people apply to deck building and how much interaction and specifically, creature removal they run.
And if people ever wanted to play green, maybe they'd catch on to Survival of the Fittest as well.
Yep.
That's actually the truth. Like, I cannot overstate how strong Survival is in decks that get to play Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent.
Right.
It's obscene.
It's just, it's a good card.
So moving on, we've talked about the win cons. What are some of the combos within the deck? Cobble, I know you've got a lot of strong synergies and value engines throughout your list. So what are kind of some of those, if you want to highlight that for us?
Right. So, I talked about the Mike and Gravecrawler combo, and that's the only combo that I would, say that's in the deck. I tried out the Rings of Bright Hearth and it's the land, the Deserted Temple.
Oh, Deserted Temple.
Right, Deserted Temple with,
Cabal Coffers or Nykthos.
Nykthos is the one. Cabal Coffers, I just cannot run that card. I
don't blame you.
It's when you don't have Urborg, it's just you have to get yourself to this point where you got like 5 or 6 lands before it starts to pay dividends, and that's too long to wait. Anyway, I tried running the Nykthos and Rings of Bright Hearth and Deserted Temple combo. And again, that was just one of those times when I would have an opening hand with Rings of Bright Hearth in it, and it's like, all right, now I just need to go and find those 2 lands, and I'm in black, so I don't have crop rotation or anything to like search for lands specifically. So it never felt great. So we're just kind of going all in on things that are reinforcing kind of the value that you're extracting from Tergrid. So it's, just having Tergrid plus your big sack effects like, Possessed Portal, Pox, and, Smokestack. Those are the really equalizing effects that you can couple with her, just because in the case of things like Necrogen Mists and Oppression and, Chains of Mephistopheles, people are choosing what it is that they're discarding, and eventually you get to this point where they just don't have anything to discard, and you're not going to be extracting any value out of them. Whereas in the case of Possessed Portal and Smokestack, if you get to the point that they don't have any permanents left, then that's a first world problem.
It's actually okay that you don't get to extract
right. It's like,
from them.
That's fine. So those wind up being like the highest bang for your proverbial buck in that case. But that's I kind of just that's kind of the long and the short of it. It's just trying to project Tergrid, and for me, you don't want to put Tergrid out and like not have ways to extract value. I think that getting a poisonous infrastructure kind of in play, and then putting Tergrid onto the battlefield, after you've kind of got those pieces in line, seems to be the best way to go.
Right.
And it's one of those things where in practice, it is so much stronger than I think, for me personally, like my first reading of the card, I was like, okay, that's really something. But like, just when you're pulling 2, 3, 4 permanents from your opponents, on each of their turns, it's so huge, the disparity that it creates, and it's just awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you guys. When we decided this was what we were going with, and the patrons voted and all of that, I was not super excited because I don't have a lot of I didn't have a lot of interest in Tergrid. After I saw you guys build these lists, I got really excited because these lists look fun as hell, and they honestly just look like they're a blast. Fenix, when we're talking about yours, we talked about this a little bit earlier, where you don't really have a, what one would say a real combo, where, I guess the only real combo would be like Tergrid and Possessed Portal, right?
Yeah, and I don't really have a win condition either, other than that. The one thing that I could maybe air quotes into a combo that is in the deck is you have Bone Miser, and then if you have something like Necropotence, or if you Chain of Smog yourself and then copy the Chain of Smog on yourself, you can kind of hand sculpt yourself into a winning hand. Something that will answer what's on the board or get you to Possess Portal, something along those lines.
Wait, can you?
Depends on what's in your hand, but kind of.
Right. If you've got 2, if you start with 2 non-land, non-creature cards, then you can Chain of Smog, targeting yourself, and then discard those cards, draw 2 cards, and then put another copy of Chain of Smog onto the stack,
right,
and then repeat.
But that only works until you hit creatures or lands.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be, that's going to be a lot better if you've got Necropotence or something like that, where you're starting, or Vilist or something like that, where you're starting from.
Definitely a lot of cards that are a lot better when you have Necropotence in play.
Right. and then of course you are playing. So it's kind of the Shadow Bag technology as well, where if you then hit your Shadow of the Grave in the middle of that, then you do actually get to hand sculpt yourself.
Right.
So I'm not gonna lie, when I first looked at the document with all of our deck lists side by side, I'd kind of scrolled down a bit and hadn't checked whose was whose up at the top. And I just saw the Bone Miser. I was like, oh, well, there's Cobbles.
Yep. That's right.
I saw Bone Miser and Shadow of the Grave. I was like, oh, that one's Cobbles. All right, cool.
Nope.
And then I scrolled up. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. See, I've moved on. I'm on to bigger and better things now.
Are you though?
No, I just like to say that.
I feel like that's how high a
Other than
bar is
that,
that.
I did.
Ouch.
I did have the entire combo that Cobble was actually talking about with the Deserted Temple and the Cabal Coffers and Rings of Bright Hearth, and decided that Rings of Bright Hearth was too dead of a card to keep in.
Right.
But you do still have the Deserted Temple and the Cabal Coffers.
Yeah, I do. In this case,
Deserted
making a bunch of
Temple
mana.
seems a little sus. Seems a little sus to me.
Making a bunch of mana to activate the backside of Tergrid is generally the game plan at that point, or maybe activate the value lands that we have that are doing things with Tergrid.
Right. And
Sure, if you have 6 Devotion to Black, that's great, but like it's a bit of a big if, right?
Yeah, something like Guy Reach Sanitarium discarding 2 rather than 1 with Tergrid out, stuff like that.
That also works.
yeah. And we'll get into that mana base here in a moment, because I actually do want to get into these mana bases this week because there's some interesting things going on in there. But and really when we get down to it, with Spleenface, your combos, we touched on this a little bit earlier. You do have Grasp of Fate, or not Grasp of Fate, Jesus, Praetor's Grasp.
Praetor's Grasp.
And then the Marlin Opposition Agent. So if you want to talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, so those cards are in my deck, and if you assemble them, you win the game.
So
I don't know what else there is to say.
Fair enough.
I mean, I think I talked in my win condition sections. I sort of talked about the rationale behind including these cards.
Well, to be fair, I just kind of tune you out when you talk.
I don't blame you. I've never blamed anyone for that. So the other thing with Grasp is that, again, because I'm running so many things, like, I really just want the whole table to be hellbent. It's nice to be able to grasp something and then, like, have it in exile, and then I can just play it when I need it, and then not have to worry that, like, oh no, it's not the right time to play it, but, like, I'm slowly whittling down everyone's hands, and, like, I'm gonna have to discard this next turn or whatever.
Right.
Guys, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to meme.
So, like, the big difference between Praetor's Grasp and Opposition Agent is that Opposition Agent fixes the mana for you. You can spend black mana as any kind. If you're going for the Praetor's Grasp to grab somebody's Oracle, have you found in practice that, like, getting the BB or getting the blue is
So yeah, Oracle's definitely like a rough one to try and take. Needing 2 mana is like a lot harder than only needing 1. Like so often you might go for, like, you could go for Breach. You could even conceivably go for, like, Ad Nauseam or Peer. Yeah. Obviously this deck doesn't have great Ad Nauseams, but in a super low, like, if everyone else is in a super low resource situation, just like a mid-range Ad Naus that draws 20 life worth of cards, which is, like, even though this deck is pretty chunky, that's still like 10 plus cards, right?
Yeah.
Is often just going to be good enough. So yeah, it's certainly, like, again, it's not a proactive game plan where it's not like, oh, I have Praetor's Grasp, so I'm just going to tutor for consult and then take someone's Oracle and jam it. Because the other thing with that is that, like, you don't have ways to protect it, right? I'm playing Imp's Mischief because I'm in mono black. So like, you can either just really early take an Oracle and then try and assemble some way to pay for it, stealing someone's dockside or whatever. Or you can take something that's just a little bit easier to cast.
Right.
And just use it more proactively rather than holding it as an A plus B combo that you're trying to assemble.
Guys, listen.
Like, it doesn't pull.
If you run up again, if you play against Dan, it'll be fine. You just Praetor's Grasp him for a Lab Maniac. Problem solved. You have to be playing Labman Dan
Okay.
specifically.
Yep, that makes sense.
But yeah, I think that like this is certainly not. It doesn't play. Praetor's Grasp is not a Thassa's Oracle in this deck, right? It's not like we're just gonna hold this until we assemble the combo. It's not even, people always talk about like, oh, you can play the Isochron Scepter, and put like a counter spell under it, and yeah, you can do that, but like this is a card that you are probably more often than not using in some sort of proactive way to further your game plan rather than saving as one part of an A plus B combo.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. That makes sense. And I think that because I think there's a lot of people who, especially, who might play this that would play, like the Jund, like Corvold lists and things like that and see Praetor's Grasp as that A plus B enabler. And, it is, I do appreciate you pointing that out where it's, not in this list.
Yeah, I think the only way base, just not including other people's decks that all of us are playing to make blue mana, is probably Lion's Eye Diamond.
Or Lotus Petal, potentially.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all playing Mox Diamond, though obviously that only makes one. But yeah, that is the other thing is that
Thalwar Stone, there you go.
Yep. Presumably, also, you are going to wind up with other people's lands at some point.
That's the main thing.
It's very difficult to evaluate this deck by goldfishing because, like, it so matters what you're getting from people, right? Like, you can't just be like, okay, my opponents discard 3 cards each. Okay, how many lands do I get off of that?
Right.
Like, is 2 a reasonable assumption? Like, I don't know.
I turbo out Tergrid and I cast Pox. What do I get?
Right.
I don't know.
Like, it's sort of like if you've ever tried to like goldfish, like how many cards does this Mystic Remora draw? How many cards or how much mana does this Carpet of Flowers make? Like that sort of stuff. But it's like that, except it's your commander, so you see it literally every game, and you're just like, I don't know.
And this is kind of interesting because I feel like this deck has got to be a nightmare. Like you think Paco and Halden is hard to play on webcam.
I've seen people play it on webcam. They just have to have a ton of dry erase Infinitokens, and it winds up being impossible to tell what the heck is happening on the Tergrid player's board because unless they have like really good handwriting, they've just got like 30 handwritten tokens on their side of the board, and
I'm honestly super impressed that Infinitokens managed to make a business model out of their dry erase tokens when you can literally use a dry erase marker on a sleeve with a white piece of paper in it. I don't know. That's some tenacity. Like
they did it. They got there.
And they're nice. I even have a couple, but it's like I don't know.
See?
This is true. But kind of moving on now, like we've really talked a lot about a lot of the stuff here in these kind of later stages of this, but as we're looking at key cards and we're really looking at, what the big things you want to be looking for when you're trying to go about playing this deck, Cobble, what are the key cards for your list?
So really depends kind of on the stage of the game. So early on, the first thing that you want is disruption. And, hand disruption is really kind of one of the key things you want because you want to whittle people's hands down. So for me, if I've got a turn 1 Vampiric Tutor and, I'm trying to think of the thing that I want to play on my second turn or, the thing I want to open with if I can, is going to be like a Chains of Mephistopheles or Oppression. One of those two is kind of like the first things that I want to get on the table just because it's going to have both kind of the macro effect, like I was talking about before, stopping people from being able to kind of do the big sweeping turns, but also have kind of like that chiseling away effect that is going to be useful later for being able to extract value with Tergrid. One of the things that's really important here too is that if you're not getting other people's Remoras and Rhystic Studies and other card draw engines, it's really important that you kind of get something in place. So if I do have, especially if I get like an oppression in play or something like that, then you want to look up something like a waste knot or tiny bones as well, just because you're not naturally just going to draw into a ton of cards.
Right.
So you want to kind of have those things kind of paired together. So you definitely want to lean more on the disruption stuff, but once you've kind of got yourself established with disruption, you really do want to get some sort of card advantage piece like those as well. Even if it's like a Dark Confidant or something like that, it makes a big difference. And then later in the game, obviously, once you've kind of got the rest of that kind of infrastructure shored up, that's when you want to be thinking about either Smokestack or Possess Portal. Possess Portal is obviously the better one, but it's 8 mana. So Possess Portal is like, putting a Smokestack onto the battlefield already set at like 4 or whatever.
Right.
Because that's effectively what it's going to do per rotation. So it's really, really worth it. And the fact that it makes people not be able to draw at all as a replacement effect, saying, if someone would draw, they don't draw. Or no, it's not. Is it?
I think it's been eroded to a prevention effect.
Okay, so yeah, it's a you can't draw, period. So like people can't even win with Lab Man and that kind of stuff. So that's
it actually hasn't. No, it's not a prevention effect. So they can win with Lab Man and
so it is the replacement. Okay, that's.
I guess they could give people treasures with Hull Breacher if they really wanted to. I can't see why they would want to, but they could.
Okay, but the fact that it holds people off of their draws is just butter on top of the sacrifice and discard effects that are there. So it's cannot be overstated how good that card is, especially with a Tergrid on the board.
Right. And kind of just touching on this for a moment is, one of the lands that are in this is Mishra's Workshop. And you and Fenix both are playing that. And this was a card that I heavily advocated that both of you play. Because so Cobble's on 25 artifacts, Fenix is on 23 artifacts, and some of them are pricey. And so the advantage that Mishra's Workshop gives you here is pretty substantial, right?
Oh yeah. And given the density, like you said, you really need to have the density of artifacts in your list to qualify the inclusion of that card, just because it feels it's a land that doesn't do anything if you don't have the artifacts to to qualify its inclusion. So, but if you are playing an artifact dense list, then I mean it's insane.
Right. And it is important to note, where you're playing a Stax list where, you can jam out a turn 1 sphere of resistance or, a Tangle Wire really early and those sorts of things. Like it has a lot of things. And your list specifically, you run the expedition map. So you even have a way to get it if you need it.
Right. And we'll talk about that once we get into the individual cards and talking about our but yeah, having expedition map is very important for choosing certain lands at certain points in the game. We'll talk about that soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of moving over to Fenix, you have some of the same things going on as Cobble does with Waste Knot and Tiny Bones. Of course, you also have Bone Miser. You're also running Change, but you're the only one running Bolus's Citadel.
Yeah. I think the card kind of speaks for itself unless you cast cards off the top of your deck. And in a deck where we're trying to go Hellbent, it's allowing us to draw more cards in the situation where we're Hellbent. Right. I mean,
it also definitely helps that you're not like it becomes a lot worse if your deck is playing things like Sphere of Resistance and Thorn of Amethyst, which both Goblin and I are playing.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's definitely a bit of a one or the other.
Yeah, right, for sure. But it definitely, the fact that it doesn't require drawing is good. So if you're doing things like, Chains of Mephistopheles or whatever, it's helping you to kind of get around the effects that are prohibiting people from being able to draw profitably. And it allows you to kind of ignore things that whatever it is that's in your hand. So, similar to the way that Praetor's Grasp allows you to kind of, keep something safe in exile, and it's kind of insulated from the discard effects that you have in play. Bolas' Citadel is also kind of giving you some sort of an insulation from that. You don't care as much about what you have in your hand because you know that you can cast things off the top of your library.
Right.
And I actually have another card that's doing that exact same thing, which is Dream Devourer. And so that's the new 2-mana foretell. All your cards gain foretell creature. And so that's in there for exactly the reason that you were talking about. We're playing a lot of symmetric discard effects, things like that. And so when you Dream Devourer, you get it out of your hand, you still have access to the card, but then you're not losing cards when you're discarding.
Right. Well, that makes sense. I'm really excited to see Fenix. I want you to put this together so bad. I want to see you play it. I want to see all of you play this at some point. I really think these lists look cool.
That's actually think about the 4-way Tergrid mirror.
Oh my gosh! Please no. Absolutely
wait,
not.
Is this yours? Mine. Wait.
Whose is this?
Yes. Well, it looks like you get it.
How does this layer?
When we eventually get around to doing a 24-hour live stream, that can pad like half of it, right?
How long would that game go?
I don't know. I mean, we already had the all Stax pod, So I mean,
we've had that too many times.
We have had that too many times. It doesn't help that a lot of us in our group all kind of enjoy playing disruptive games. So, Spleen, going over to you, you play, you have a lot of different stuff going on. Of course, like you said, you're playing the Thorn of the Amethyst, the Sphere of Resistance, all that jazz. But you're also playing some very unique cards, specifically one that sticks out to me is Awaken the Erstwhile.
Okay, so a little bit of background on this card. This is a card that I've wanted to put in decks for a very, very long time. I tried it very, very briefly in Muldrotha. It didn't work. I was brewing a Verena Reanimator deck. It didn't work. It probably the closest I got was in my Yawgmoth brew, because essentially you make everyone discard their hands and get zombies, and then you can just sack the zombies to draw cards. So like, you make your opponents discard their hands and get zombies. But then I finally, this was the deck. I was like, okay, we're clearly not going to play Ad Nauseam, because this deck doesn't win nicely off Ad Nauseam and has a very chunky curve, and we're playing, we can't play Rule of Laws, but we're playing the next best things. So then I was like, well, you know what? If I can make my opponents discard their hands, and then I get all the permanents they discard, that seems about as good as this card's ever going to get. So it's in the deck. I will not be taking questions at this time.
You're also playing Mind Slicer, which you noted
We're all playing Mind Slicer.
We're all playing Mind Slicer.
Well, you noted it as a card that was
I sure did, yeah.
in there.
Yeah,
I'm just going off of your show notes, dude.
Yeah. So, yeah, under my key cards, it's definitely, I probably could have put it with Awaken the Erstwhile and then put some of the other discard effects that I'm running that the others are not. Because really, just as I said earlier, I really focused this deck around getting everyone hellbent. And I went a lot deeper on that than I think either of Cobble or Fenix did.
Hey, I just want to live the dream of chains in the Anvil of Bogarden. And watch everyone hate their lives.
Except the Gitrog players. Oops. I'm excited for people to be able to play chains now that Gitrog is on life support, I guess.
Fallen from grace.
Don't tell the Gitrog server.
Oh, I have multiple times to their faces.
Don't you have multiple people on Into the North who are very
I was going to say, isn't
active?
Noobzor's...
I'm pretty sure that the 5 games of Gitrog I played at Tier 1 Con on the weekend are more than he's played in the last few months.
So I need to get my obligatory Lavinia reference in.
Oh my gosh.
Do you, though?
How did you feel Gitrog was as compared to Lavinia? I know the answer, but I just want to hear it.
Gitrog is better than Lavinia, and it's not close. Like, I don't even have anything particularly fun or funny to say here.
I just love it. I can't help myself. I've got to bring it up. So as we move over into the tech pieces where everybody's kind of on some specific tech, Cobble, what is your kind of pieces of that you really want to kind of key in on?
It's not a tech piece, but it's important in understanding kind of the way that it fits within the deck, especially given kind of the parasitic nature, is Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Because when things are going according to plan, and you're going to be taking your opponent's lands, and even not when you're doing mass land destruction, just fetch lands and things like that. Being able to treat those lands as swamps is real important, just so that you don't have like this random mountain that you can't like use. Being able to extract black from it is useful. Being able to sacrifice it to Lake of the Dead is really useful, especially if you've got a limited number of actual swamps that you have at your disposal. If just every land that you're peeling off of one of your opponents happens to be a swamp, it just pays big dividends. And I've noticed that prioritizing the getting of Urborg into play, especially like kind of immediately prior to getting Tergrid onto the battlefield, is I think that's a very profitable play.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to highlight. I think that this is like one of a few cards in a category like with Lake of the Dead. When I initially built my list, I had Lake of the Dead in it. I think I even went deeper. Like I was on some of the lands that sacrifice themselves for 2 mana type thing. Was it Ebon Stronghold? Is that the
wow,
like enters
depletion,
tapped
depletion lands?
No, I think Ebon Stronghold is the other one of that cycle where it enters tapped and then you can tap it for 1 or tap sack it for 2.
From Fallen Empires?
Yeah. I could be wrong, though. It might be the depletion land. But anyways, I just went very deep on lands that produced extra mana at the expense of not producing mana forever. And then I just cast... I played Lake of the Dead and sacked a swamp, and then tapped it and sacked a swamp, and then cast Smallpox, and then I was like, wait a minute. I'm just... this is a deck that, runs several ways of making people sacrifice lands, and then I was like, you know what? I think I actually want all of my lands to not go to the graveyard unless they absolutely have to.
That's a part of the reason why I actually... am not running Death Cloud, and I know that you can kind of have fine-grained control over what you choose for your X there to be able to keep certain lands that you want to have in play.
Well, they do have to be integers, but
I guess that's true. But just to that notion of you know what, it is nice to be able to hold on to specific lands, like Nykthos and Urborg and Lake of the Dead and that kind of thing. And I found that these things that are just kind of like carte blanche, just sweeping all of the lands off the table. It's like, yeah, you're going to get the things from your opponents, but there is a cost to losing out on Nykthos and losing out on Urborg and Lake of the Dead. And for that reason, I'm Pox is kind of the top of that category that I'm choosing to keep in the list.
Interesting. We've heard a little bit about this next kind of side of things that Fenix is playing, is this Deserted Temple plus utility lands. So when we're looking at the tech that you're playing, Fenix, what are you doing with those and some of your other tech pieces?
Yeah, so my mana base is significantly different from both Cobble and Spleenface's mana base, and a lot of that lends itself from the fact that I am playing Villas, so I am, in fact, playing fetch lands. And so neither Cobble nor Spleenface have any reason to need to play fetch lands, and so in my case, I'm just getting extra draw off of them in some scenarios. And then on top of that, I have some more utility lands, and I'm kind of focusing more on those utility lands as my repeated source of discard rather than playing some of the enchantments that both Cobble and Spleen are playing. And so using something like Deserted Temple to activate Gyro Reach Sanitarium more than once, or for some reason I can't remember the name, it's the Castle Lockwain. And so once I'm hell-bent activating Castle Lockwain and drawing more cards, filling up my hand, and then I am playing Tabernacle, which neither of you are playing. And then I'm definitely playing Urborg. I definitely didn't forget to put it in the list and just update it right now.
Can you talk about Tabernacle a little bit more?
Yeah, so Tabernacle...
Not gonna lie, I first didn't have Urborg in my deck, and then I was like, wait a minute. I'm stealing other people's lands, and they might not tap for black.
I meant to have it in, and I just had a technical oversight, and it's in now. Yeah, so Tabernacle...
Pay no attention.
Tabernacle especially is really good in the scenario where you're, just like you were talking about, Cobble, where you're playing Deathcloud, where you're playing Pox, where if you can get all of the lands off the table except for Tabernacle, you can end up getting a whole pile of creatures that maybe do something that you want them to do when they enter the battlefield or something along those lines.
Okay.
Other than that, it's just a value... I would say maybe like a 1 mana artifact, something that eats up your land drop for the turn, but something that we're okay sacrificing to a Pox or a Deathcloud if we end up needing to do that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a good inclusion. I think I might add that to mine.
Yeah, so I like initially sort of looked at the upsides and was like, it makes people sacrifice things, and then we get them, and that's great. And then I sort of thought about it, and I just found that like this deck doesn't have the mana to be continuously needing, first of all, playing a land that doesn't tap for mana, second of all, then needing to pay for the important stuff, and then also a lot of the stuff that you're going to be getting, you're like, it's just not going to be worth it to pay for it, right?
Yeah, and it is important to note that my deck does have a couple less creatures than both yours.
Yeah, that's fair as well.
Also true.
And so, you know, we had touched a little bit to Fenix on your list about playing Dream Devour and how that, you know, you're the only one playing that, and that's one of those cards that kind of allows you to, what was the word you used, still play your cards without discarding them?
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a line of cards that you can see in my includes, something like Dream Devour, something like Bone Miser, Phyrexian Arena. I'm okay with tapping out in turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and just showing my opponents that I have nothing, and if you don't stop my other opponents from winning, I guess we're going to the next game.
And you're also playing Karn, too. What was kind of the thought process of playing Karn?
Yeah, so Karn is obviously a one-sided board wipe. Karn is also a way to convert. Black notoriously has issues dealing with artifacts and enchantments. I am playing a couple more. A single more piece of enchantment removal with the Farika's Libation, which lets you cause opponents to sacrifice enchantments if you want to. But Karn is one of the few ways to turn an artifact into a creature and then use Black's creature removal on that artifact.
Okay.
If there's something problematic on the board, something that you can't deal with.
The ability to just null rod all of your opponent's artifacts is also upside too.
Absolutely.
Right. Going over to Spleenface, one of the cards, you had a couple cards on there, and I'm really interested to hear about, you know, your tech pieces and really kind of where they are.
Yeah, so I think one of the cards I was actually most surprised not to see in other people in Cobbler Phoenix's lists was the bottomless pit. Obviously, like, the discard effects get significantly worse from there, but just the fact that that one's random, in my mind, hugely increases the value. To the point where I think I actually put, like, I'm not even sure. I think I thought of it before I thought of Desolation for this deck. Because you just, first of all, you want to be hitting things that are good for you to get with Tergrid. And then second of all, you just want to be taking, like, you know, you want to be taking their, like, demonic tutor, right? There's a reason that Hymn to Turak is, like, you know, a card that gets itself banned in formats, and, like, Mind Rot is a card that's barely playable and limited. And so that was definitely one. I'm honestly, I have Nether Void in there. I don't know. Obviously, that's, like, a card that's very, very difficult to evaluate without just playing a lot of games with it, and would probably also vary hugely in value by your metagame. But that was, like, to me, that was a pretty natural feeling extension of you know, the Sphere of Resistance and Thorn of Amethyst and Trinisphere, and Damping Sphere, which I'm also running.
Explain the Damping Sphere for me for a second.
It's just another sort of anti-storm hate piece. Obviously, it's, like, it's not as good at the low end.
Okay.
But it quickly gets to the point where, like if you try and cast 3 spells in a turn, then it's a Sphere of Resistance. And if you try and go beyond that, it's even better than a Sphere of Resistance.
Okay.
So it's not great against stopping, like, Oracle Consult, but it's very, very good against things that involve casting, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 spells, like even just you know, tutoring, like even just tutoring and playing your win condition, it's pretty good against that sort of thing. Let alone, you know, trying to ritual, like, hands where you go, like, ritual wheel and then try and play stuff off the wheel. You know, just a bunch of things like that.
So I think that makes sense, given, like, you said that you kind of made an intentional choice kind of against the lands that tap for more than 1 mana, where
yeah, to an extent, yes, those play in with each other as well. I mean, I am still running Nykthos because I think it's, like, a very low, it's a low opportunity cost,
right?
But enabling me to play Damping Sphere was, you know, it, like, if I was running those lands, it would definitely make Damping Sphere a lot less appealing.
Right. So that's because I think I considered Damping Sphere, but given how much I lean on things like Nykthos and Lake of the Dead and Mishra's Workshop, you know, just the non-bow potential, just it feels really bad.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think one card that both of you are running that I'm not, that sort of jumped out to me initially as strange is Wishclaw Talisman. I'm curious, like, you know, it's obviously a very strong tutor, but when I was sort of thinking about the deck, I went, like, if you don't end the game, Wishclaw Talisman is a huge liability, right? Like, I was thinking, like, oh yeah, I can Wishclaw Talisman, I can make everyone hellbent, and then I can die to whatever the person I gave the Wishclaw Talisman to tutors. I'm curious, like, what, you know, when you...
Opposition agent.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, getting opposition agent is very good.
Like, that's the main, for me, like, that's the main thing that it's there for. Or you if you've already got opposition agent, sort of like what you said, where, you know, that's kind of a high priority thing that you want to get in play early, just because it has such a big effect that either you use it to go and find opposition agent, or you probably already got opposition agent, and then, well, okay, then you can just use it with impunity.
Or you could 12-head your opponents, you tutor, you pass holding 3 mana, they don't activate it, and then on your turn, you place the thing that you tutored for that isn't opposition agent and pass holding 3 mana.
that is 12 heads.
Got him.
I did want to just mention the bottomless pit too, because
Right.
that's not like a forgot it. There's a lot of time, and I definitely will admit that there's arguments can be made for and against, but this is a very kind of determined, kind of a lot of times very slow and methodical accumulation of hate pieces, kind of a list. And there's times where it's like, okay, I've got possessed portal in hand, or I've got something in hand that is high value that is either I don't have the resources in play yet, or I have it's not the right moment. I need to get this other thing in play first, and then this thing. And I just found that the liability of losing something, or even worse, like a card advantage piece, like Waste Not or something like that, just not being able to be in control of the things that you yourself are discarding, felt like like a high liability. Do you feel like that's mitigated, or that's acceptable?
Certainly, I built my deck so that there's not a huge number of things that I'm not okay discarding. There's definitely just with my repeated discard effects, there's just a huge density of those, and I often was goldfishing hands where I had multiple of them, and then it was I discarded, I discarded Necrogen Mists to my bottomless pit. I'm okay with this. And there's not I tried to build the deck so that there weren't cards that I didn't want to play early as well.
Right.
So, I was very rarely faced with this I want to hold this, I don't want to play it yet, but I also want to start getting everyone hellbent. So I just sort of accepted that
Right.
I'm going to be getting hellbent, and that means that it's hard in these types of hands. It's going to be difficult for me to make long-term plans, and I just kind of leaned into that.
Okay. One of the cards that I immediately think of as one that I include as kind of a hedge of, okay, I'm expecting that I'm just going to be discarding cards a lot and it's okay, is Yawgmoth's Will. And, kind of with the expectation of, okay, well, that's going to be kind of if I lost some pieces in hand, then I'm just going to be able to use that later to, kind of clean up whatever stuff I lost to the bin. And not being able to be in charge of being able to hold that in hand. Maybe that's just me being a little bit, risk averse or whatever.
No, I definitely get that, and that's one of the reasons I did put in the Volrath Stronghold, because you can buy back some of those more key pieces.
That makes sense.
But I definitely, and obviously I thought about Yawgmoth's Will as we're all going to be discarding our hands. I'll just slam Yawgmoth's Will, and then I looked at the Transfigure Sphere of Resistance, Throne of Amethyst, Damping Sphere, and Nether Void, and went maybe this isn't the deck for Yawgmoth's Will.
Right. Nether Void is one of those where I think people might look at it and be like, oh, that's just another rule of law effect because it's going to keep people to only playing one spell per turn. I mean, in a lot of circumstances, it keeps people to casting 0 spells per turn, and adding the 3 mana to every single spell, of any spell that people try to cast, is just so much that I find that if you didn't find a way to get Lake of the Dead online or something like that, that a lot of the important pieces just become out of reach, and then you lose your tempo of being able to kind of accelerate your hate pieces onto the board. And I don't know if you've experienced similar kind of drawbacks to running that card.
Yeah, I definitely have. It's a card that can be hard to play out early, and I think that in many ways it sort of exacerbates the I know Fenix was basically saying he just sort of accepted that if someone else isn't helping slow down the game, that it's probably just going to run away from him. As a general rule, I think I was a little more pessimistic and actually tried to build the deck a little bit more so that it would have tools to slow down the game and like, be able to execute its game plan. Obviously not independent of the pod that it's in, but less dependent on having a favorable pod composition. And I guess this is like the one thing where I just kind of went the opposite direction and went like, you know what, if I don't come out of the gate, swinging, then like, yeah, this card's going to be really rough. But hopefully, like, I'm just, I'm aggressively mulliganing for acceleration and just like trying to get off the ground really fast. And so if I can develop a bit and then slam it on like turn 3 or 4, then I'm very, very happy with sort of my position.
Yep, that makes sense.
All right, are we ready for the secret spice?
Uh-oh.
I don't know if either one of you saw it or even knows what the card is, but so I have...
Wait, okay, well, hang on a second. Then now I have to look through your list and see what you think is secret spice.
It's in the sorceries.
It's in the sorceries. I mean, we did already talk... Oh, is it Vertus's Maneuver?
Yeah. So, outside of... So, just generally, the card is just a 3-mana, one-sided edict, right? But in the magical Tergrid Christmas land, you can actually do some spicy things with Vertus's Maneuver. And so, for those who don't know what Vertus's Maneuver is, it's 2 and a black sorcery. And for each player, you choose friend or foe, and each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. And each foe sacrifices a creature they control. And so if Tergrid is out and you have people hellbent, you can actually force them to return creatures to their hand and then make them discard. But this is magical Christmas land.
Yes. In a world where what's in their graveyard is better than what's on their field and they're hellbent and you have a way to make them discard. I mean,
exactly.
You're not wrong.
It is.
I'm not going to say that you can't do that.
The evaluation
Christmas
is roughly
time comes
one-sided.
once a year.
The evaluation is that it's a card that's basically along the lines of Plaguecrafter, where it's a one-sided.
To quote Friday Nights, are tickets to Magical Christmas Land cheaper if you book them this far in advance?
Absolutely.
Wow.
So as we go and we look at kind of comparing all the lists against each other, we look at the creatures that are in this list, and so we look at some of the notable things that everybody's playing that are very unique. We've already talked about on Cobble's list the Gravecrawler and the Machias, but you're also playing Liliana Heretical Healer. What's kind of the thought process there?
It's just kind of a winds up being, eventually kind of a secondary Liliana of the Veil effect, because really most of the time is what you want to be doing is like Spleen was saying, just try to keep people hellbent as much as possible, and having a repeatable effect that just does that uniformly to everybody every turn is really good. And the trade-off that you're making between Lily of the Veil versus the Origins Lily is that on the one you're forcing people to do kind of like another Pox effect in the case of Lily of the Veil, but it's only one player, and the Origins Lily is letting you recur things that you might have had to let go because of all these sacrifice effects. And it's one of those things where maybe in a pinch, just being able to get that Dark Confidant back out of your graveyard or something like that, or Tiny Bones, or you can't do a Tiny Bones because he's legendary,
right?
But just having more density of those symmetric discard effects and just extra value of being able to pull things out of your yard. I Mind Slicer, for instance, that's one of those ones where getting a second hit out of that, maybe after it's already, happened once and people have found a way to claw back a little bit. Being able to just have that value, I've found has been pretty good.
Right. Looking at, we go over to Fenix's list. We've discussed Dream Devourer, Bone Miser, Villas. You've kind of touched on Villas a little bit, but you're the only one playing Villas, Fenix.
So both Cobble and Spleen are playing Razaketh instead as their reanimation target, and
Yep.
they are also not playing Curse Totem. And so the one nice thing about Villas is that I can still get the value out of it with a Curse Totem out, and I don't have to worry about dealing with my own Curse Totem while it's out and trying to still win the game that way. Villas will still just draw me cards while Curse Totem is out.
Right. And then, so Spleen, you really are the one that's the most divergent. We talked about Varagoth. We talked about Maryland.
I think Phoenix is the most divergent, though maybe that's inflated by the mana base.
Perhaps. Well, I mean, in the creature department specifically.
Oh.
You know, because you're playing Burglar Rat, you're playing Cunning Lethomancer, Elderfang Disciple. We already talked about Maryland. And I think you touched on this earlier, where you're just trying to get like a certain density of those effects, right?
Yeah. And like, I think maybe I might have been overstating the case. Like, obviously getting people hellbent is like the ideal circumstance of the deck. But essentially, I didn't. There's like a point where where the rewards for making people discard like start getting good, and I think that point is like I did some sort of testing where I was looking at like other decks that I've played, and you know, what would I discard here and here, and like that point was generally I found that if you only make people discard like 2 cards each, it's going to be pretty underwhelming in terms of what you get for Tergrid. But then once you get up to like 3 and 4 cards, that's when you really start getting like the good payoffs. You start consistently getting lands. Potentially you get like, you know, some utility stuff that people just couldn't get out of their hands. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to be able to consistently make everyone discard like that many cards every game.
Right. That makes sense. Cards that everybody is running there in the where is it, the creature suite. Everybody's playing Bob. Everybody's playing Mind Slicer, Op Agent, Plague Crafter, Tiny Bones, and both you and Cobble, Spleen, are playing Rankle, Master of Pranks, and Rankle gets to pull a lot of weight as both a way of getting your opponents to sacrifice stuff and discard things, right?
Oh yeah. They definitely get prankled. It's
the ability that the like I was saying before about how, you know, Possessed Portal and Smokestack are better, quote unquote, better than things like Necrogen Mists or whatever, because they, you know, you don't get to this point where they're like not doing anything. Rankle is great because he's got haste, so you know he's gonna get through every time,
right?
And flying, yeah, for sure,
right. So he's gonna make contact as soon as he comes down, and being able to choose between, you know, making people discard and making people sacrifice it's huge, and just being able to kind of, you know, like feel out what's happening at the table.
I mean, you can choose all of them if you really want to.
You definitely can choose all of them. I found that most of the time I didn't want to be making people draw unless I had like chains out. Then it was pretty great. But no, I mean, obviously, Rankle isn't braids, but you know, if you squint hard enough,
if you had enough to drink,
yep,
yeah.
After a few shots,
like, it's the card. It's your like. Your disappointing rebound from braids, you know?
As you know, we touched on Planeswalkers a little bit with Karn being the big divergence away from everybody else, with Phoenix playing Karn. But everybody is also on Liliana of the Veil, so Reed Duke would be proud of everybody. Going down to the sorcery suite, and really, Cobblepott's you're not playing anything that anybody else is not playing already. You're on Demonic Tutor. Everybody's playing that. Everybody's playing Imp Seal, Pox, Reanimate, Smallpox. But you're not playing any unique cards. When I look at Fenix's list, we did talk about this just a moment ago, is the Virtues Maneuver and the Chain of Smog. We've talked about that. But Fenix, you're also playing Night's Whisper. And what was the thought process there?
Pay 2 mana, draw 2 cards.
So you know what? That's a very straightforward thought process.
That's fair.
I cannot find any fault with it.
Right.
And then you are
blood, but
that's fair. And then Spleen, you are playing Delirium Skeins, and does that fall back on the I just want so many of these effects, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get. I'm also, I guess. Oh, Cobblepot's also playing Mind Rake, which is the mind rot with overload.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, just like make everyone discard, and then you get value from it with either of Waste Not or Tergrid.
Right.
Sort of the thought process there.
Okay.
Right. I came really close to running the one that has it's 1 in a black sorcery that has an alternate cost where you sacrifice a creature and each player exiles 2 cards from their hand. Something swords.
Yeah, the fact
like
that you
Mind
don't
Swords.
get them with Tergrid though is
right, and that's ultimately why I chose not to do it, because it was an exile effect as opposed to a discard effect.
Right.
But if you really, really, want to have the high density of all the effects that's going to get people hellbent, then that one is brutal as well to include.
Right.
Mind Swords, where it's. Also, I don't know that you want to be sacrificing a creature all that often, though I guess just paying retail for it is pretty.
I mean, you can sacrifice other players' creatures too. That's like a big part of, the creature sacrifice stuff is like with Razakath. It's like, you don't need your own creatures. I'm just going to sacrifice this Arbor Elf that somebody gave me and, go and get something useful. So,
looking at the instant suite, Cobble is the only one playing Culling the Weak. And what was kind of you're just trying to play it out faster, right?
Right. So, running Cabal Ritual, Culling the Weak, and Dark Ritual, all of those things are there for the circumstances, either where, Culling the Weak a little bit less so, just because you're not guaranteed to have a small creature, turn 1 or turn 2 or something like that. But being able to just kind of accelerate into some of the bigger pieces, especially things like Possess Portal, obviously.
Right.
Just having this broad density through our mana base and through our ritual suite, just giving us a little bit of extra reach to get to some of those more expensive hate pieces as early as we can.
Right. Fenix, you've got a lot of unique instants here. You're playing. We talked about Shadow of the Grave already, and I believe we talked about Farrakha's Libation. You're also playing Slaughter Pact and Withering Boon.
Yeah, Slaughter Pact I'm playing instead of Deadly Rollick, which I think both Cobble and Spleen are on. And I'm playing Slaughter Pact instead of Deadly Rollick because I'm not confident in the amount of times that Tergrid will actually still be on the board. With how commander-centric the strategy is and how relatively obvious that the commander is the main piece of the strategy if you sit across the table from this deck, I don't think that Deadly Rollick is going to get its free value very often. And so that's why I went with the Slaughter Pact instead. And then Withering Boon is just a black counterspell for creatures. It stops Oracle Consult.
This is true.
That is true. Spleen, we already talked. You were playing Demonic Consultation, but you're also playing Malakir Rebirth and Snuff Out.
Yeah, I again found in testing. I originally had Slaughter Pact, and I just found that a lot of the times I was like very, very unhappy to be committing mana that I didn't have, or like wanted to use to. A lot of the time, it felt like I was time walking myself with Slaughter Pact. So I tried Snuff Out in its place. And Malakir Rebirth just has, like, you know, it gets the occasional incidental value, particularly with, like, Burglar Rat and Elderfang Disciple, but also Mind Slicer and Plague Crafter to an extent, and that it's just a land if you need it to be, so... It's definitely not particularly deep.
That's fair.
But I found that having one tapped land was manageable.
Right. Moving on into the artifact suite, you know, everybody, Spleen, you are playing the slimmest amount of artifacts. We talked about Damping Sphere, but you're also playing Charcoal Diamond, which is the tapped, I believe that's the pay 2 mana tap.
Yeah, it's just the enters tapped monocolor rock.
Okay.
And it's sad, and you don't want to be playing it, but you don't get access to better rocks in monocolor, unfortunately.
Right.
That's one of those things that's like very, very, very sad, at least in my book, that, you know, there's two, like, you get to play Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone. If you're in 2 colors, essentially you have 6 2 mana, enters untapped, make 1 or both of your color rocks, and then...
Right. No talisman for you.
Yeah, you don't get talismans, you don't get signets, so it's definitely, like, a little bit rough.
It's a feel bad.
Low colors, but you just want to be accelerating as much as possible in ways that don't go away. Like, I even looked at playing some of the worst ones, like... you know, Cold Steel Heart and...
oh, jeez.
I mean, I guess Cold Steel Heart is basically just Charcoal Diamond.
I was just going to say, right.
But, what's it? Star Compass? Like, I considered it. But I think probably before going into one of the conditional ones, I just go for something that makes colorless, like Prismatic Lens. But, yeah, I just wanted to be making black mana, and I wanted to be making more of it than the number of lands I could play. And... your options are pretty limited in mono black.
Right. Also, you know, you and Fenix are both playing Anvil of Bogarden. Fenix, you're also playing Bolas's Citadel, which is unique. You're playing Mindstone. But I think the big 2 things here that I see is Scroll Rack and Curse Totem. And you touched a little bit on that you are playing Curse Totem. You're the only one playing Curse Totem, but why that inclusion specifically?
The only activated ability in my entire deck that I care about is maybe Tiny Bones activation. And that is once in a blue moon. It is possible sometimes that Curse Totem could be turning off mana dorks that I'm getting, but I'm willing to take that risk for the slowdown effect that it has on green decks.
There is a Villas in your deck, right?
Yeah, but oh well.
I mean, sure. I'm not saying that precludes you running Curse Totem. Saying I don't care about it feels a little disparaging to Villas. Definitely activating Villas is is pretty good.
Yeah, the Mind Stone, I had the exact same thought process that Spleen did, and rather than land on Charcoal Diamond, I landed on something that I could sacrifice for a card if I needed to.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then Scroll Rack, you're just trying to find stuff, right?
Yeah, or the real spicy line that I thought of when I was thinking about including it was just if I know that I'm doing something like Pox or making people hellbent, being able to ditch the cards that I want to play from my hand and putting them on top of my deck, and then making everybody hellbent and drawing that card off the top.
Right. You know,
the first person to, I guess, God Eternal Kefnet uses it this way too, but the real value in the Scroll Rack being that you get to put cards back on top, not that you get to take cards off the top.
Oh yeah, when your Mind Slicer is going to trigger and you don't want to lose 2 of the cards in your hand or something like that, that's exactly the reason it's in there.
Cobble, you are playing the most artifacts of everybody. You are uniquely playing Phyrexian Alder, Expedition Map, Tanglewire, and Torpor Orb. So kind of the thought process. We talked about Expedition Map a little bit earlier, and we know that Phyrexian Altar is part of your combo piece with Machias and Gravecrawler. But, Tinglewire and Torpor Orb, Torpor Orb, I'm assuming you're attacking specifically kind of Docksides and Oracles.
Right. That's a hedge against Oracle and Dockside for the most part. I'm less so Dockside because we're okay with Dockside triggering if, somebody else's Dockside dies and comes over to our side. But we don't have great ways to interact with Oracle. And this is just kind of a hedge. Another, hopeful way to keep those players who are, on blue-black distracted from being able to do their win con long enough for us to be able to kind of get a foothold on what's happening in the game. And similar kind of thing with Tanglewire. Tanglewire isn't a permanent measure that will establish, a game state where people can't get out of it, but it will delay the game long enough for, you see it. It's a very common Stax piece for giving people a window to be able to, just either, get that extra hate piece or get, sequence a couple of plays to be able to reach that foothold that they're trying to get to. And, it certainly goes without saying that if you've got Tergrid out, then getting your Tanglewire into play is going to be even better because, you're going to be pulling permanents from other players. So you're going to have extra chaff to be able to tap. So the, even while it's live, it's going to have a disproportionate effect on your opponents than it's going to have on you because you're going to have kind of things that you don't care about that you can just kind of tap and not really feel the adverse effects.
Right.
It's also disproportionately affects your opponents because it's such a hilariously asymmetrical design.
Right. It's like, I'm just going to tap the
gets me
Tanglewire
every time.
Yep.
They tap 4, then I tap 2, then they tap 3, then I tap 1. Yeah, that's symmetrical.
Seems good. Yep, that checks out.
Looking over at the enchantments, but Cobble, yours is pretty, you have a lot of overlap, entire overlap pretty much with everybody else. You're playing, Animate Dead, Blood Chief Ascension, Chains, Contamination, Desolation, Necrogen Mists, all that jazz. Fenix, you're playing Phyrexian Arena, and that's your big departure from the rest of the group. What's the thought process of that?
Radical departure.
I know, right? You want to draw cards, right?
Phyrexian Arena is definitely emblematic of the difference in strategy between my deck and the other two. The fact that I'm willing to tap out for 3 mana for a card next turn is very emblematic of the difference.
Right. Looking at Spleenfaces, you've got Nether Void, which we've talked about. We talked about this a little bit earlier, is Words of Waste. And what is this doing for you, especially for somebody who's not familiar with this card?
Yeah, so there's a whole cycle of cards that Words of Wind is the blue one that's probably seen more commonly. And essentially it says you pay 1, and then it says the next time you would draw a card this turn, each one has an effect. And the black one, Words of Waste, is instead each opponent discards a card. So essentially you can just turn, you hit a certain point in the game where often because the deck doesn't run a ton of card draw specific value engines, you often run out of cards first. And then it's quite possible that the cards that you're going to be drawing are going to line up pretty poorly against a card in each of your opponent's hands. So essentially you can just exchange that and make them discard instead. And just sort of try and do your best to drag everyone down towards 0.
Right.
It's also a really funny situation if you have Waste Not and Words of Waste in play at the same time.
Yes.
For the circumstances where, somebody discards a land giving you 2 black mana, and then somebody discards anything that allows you to draw, and then you just go again, and people learn not to discard lands to Words of Waste if they can, but then, as long as you're drawing cards, you can just kind of keep on making it happen, and it's antics ensue.
Holy cow. I'm just looking at Waste Not right now, And it's not the card interaction, none of that stuff, but it's a $16 card. Holy cow. Wow. When did that happen?
Tiny Bones.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
It even has 2 printings, right? That's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Admittedly, one of them's Commander, but...
I mean, Commander's 16, but... you're also playing Mind Slash and Dance of the Dead.
Yeah, I mean... So there used to be more reanimation in the deck, and I just never really took Dance of the Dead out. So that will, probably would come out of the list pretty quickly. Because I used to just have... I was on Vilas and Razaketh for a bit, then I tried like a Macias package. But Mind Slash, the thought process there was that, random discard is better than your opponent choosing the discard, but you choosing the discard is
even better.
Right.
Way better. Yeah, like if you can get an early Mind Slash, you can just snipe some absolutely insane things, right? Like, oh, Jay, I'll just Mind Slash you. Oh, is that a heuristic study you have?
Look at that Notion Thief.
Yeah, don't mind if I do. So, I mean, yeah, and it also... we are enabling it somewhat because we just have like the Burglar Rat and Elderfang Disciple that we talked about in the creature section. Obviously, it's not like we're still only on 12 creatures, and one of them's Razaketh, which you're probably not sacrificing to Words of Waste,
right?
But we are running a couple more creatures, and those creatures tend to be smaller and less impactful than the average, if we compare to the creatures that we're all running. So it's enabled a little bit by that as well. And it also is enabled by, you can sort of, if you're against creature-heavy decks, you can basically just chain.
Right.
You sacrifice a creature, you look at someone's hand, you make them discard a creature, which you then sacrifice, and you can just, go through.
You pull the thread and their whole sweater comes off.
Yeah, exactly. And having, I mean, probably Dance of the Dead would come out anyways, but having a bunch of small reanimate things is also quite good for this because you can just pull stuff out of the bin as fodder, or obviously reanimating people's docksides and things like that is insane, or Spellseeker or anything like that. But you have a few different ways of generating things to sacrifice to Mind Slash that aren't present in either of Cobble or Phoenix's list.
Right. Looking at the mana bases here for a moment, here as we kind of come to the end here, everybody's running about 30 lands, about 32 when you count in the MDFCs. So everybody's kind of in that same general, area. Cobble, you're playing Cabal Pit and Inventor's Fair. Nobody else is playing that. What were your thoughts with those?
Cabal Pit is just another removal spell that's on a land that nobody can interact with. It's really nice for just, sniping somebody's dockside and taking it. And so you're losing a land, but you're going way up on mana in that exchange.
Right.
Also kills Notion Thief and all of the other thieves that you care about. It's just an extra axis of being able to interact with the table, so it's good. Inventor's Fair. So I'm running a ton of artifacts,
right.
So it's going to be live, and being able to just have the open menu to go through and find whatever artifact makes sense to either, hose what's happening at the table, slow people down, accelerate, or put your possessed portal, on the battlefield. Having the flexibility there is really good. So
right.
It's a tutor basically for the things that we care about.
Right.
And it's on
it also
land.
gains you 1 life every turn. Hello.
Which is not inconsequential, because when you're grinding, you got to keep your life total up, and that was actually the original reason why I put Bloodchief Ascension in there, was just kind of for the grind value, and then realizing, wait a minute, no, this just kills your opponents.
It definitely kills people real fast.
Yeah, it really does. So,
Phoenix, you have the most differences of everybody. We talked about Tabernacle. We talked that you get to play fetch lands. You're also playing Cabal Coffers. I think we talked about that. Command Beacon, Castle Lochthwain. What's the thought process there? I feel like I could probably figure it out, but just, for the people at home.
Yeah, so I am playing War Room as well. So War Room, Castle Lochthwain, Gaia Reach, Sanitarium.
I'm playing War Room. You're not special.
I'm playing Deserted Temple to untap them and activate them again for obscene amounts of mana.
Okay, maybe you are special.
We didn't say it was right, just special.
That's right.
And so it's just a incidental card draw where my deck specifically is playing a whole pile of incidental card draw along with incidental discard. And so you'll churn through your deck pretty quickly, even in gold fishing with the way that it's set up. And then the Command Beacon is just an additional, we're in mono black and we don't need the difference between 9 and 10 snow-covered swamps isn't that big, and so it's a way around Draenith Magistrate.
Right. That makes sense.
It's worth talking about the fetch lands just a little bit.
Right.
So my rationale for not choosing the fetch lands is that it makes it easier to play against the metagame, which is saturated with opposition agent, depending on what your local meta is like. So if you can opt out of playing fetch lands altogether and not lose anything in the transaction, it just makes it, lower peril to be able to just move forward with your game plan and kind of not break parity kind of with what your opponents are doing, where if somebody has an early opposition agent and your opponents are kind of screwed because, well, great, now they've got fetch lands. Not having fetch lands be part of the equation at all just kind of takes that off the table. I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think I touched on that when I mentioned that I was playing Villas. Is the only reason that the fetch lands are even in mine is Villas.
Okay.
So when we look at Spleenfaces here, as we're kind of getting to the end of it, Spleen, your most unique land that you're running is Volrath Stronghold.
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously it does tap for colorless, which is not ideal, but I just found that it was potentially quite useful in getting back things like opposition agent. It can do sort of a pseudo Words of Waste impression with things like Burglar Rat and Elderfang Disciple, or I guess a Tabernacle impression with Plague Crafter. I don't know it's not really Tabernacle, but you see what I'm like.
Right.
You can just play it every turn, and also just the it's one more way that you don't have to care too much about what you're discarding, because if you really want to get something that you wound up discarding back, then you have Volrath Stronghold to do it in a way that is very difficult to interact with for your opponents.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Man, these are such cool lists. I really hope at least one of you guys put it together in paper so we can actually see it in action, because this is just a really cool list, and I really want to see these in action. But with that, that about wraps things up here for us today. Just a quick reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at SculptyBoys, or you can find a direct link in our link tree below in the description. Also want to give a shout out to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/themindSculptors, or check out the link in the description. We are also now a TCG Player affiliate. So if you want to help support the show, you can buy your cards with our affiliate link down in the description as well. And that will go towards helping us out also. So thank you guys for coming on and, sharing with us your Tergrid builds. Everybody except Spleen kind of had really kind of punny names for your decks, and
okay, I would say I tried, but
I think you did a great job. Tergridlock?
I like it.
There was not a lot of effort was put into that one. I'll be straight with you.
I mean, it's no Pax Machina, but what are you going to do?
I would have liked it more if it was like Deus Pax Machina. But,
right.
I'm just saying, I'm not trying to drive the car for you. But
Aren't you, though?
Yeah. Seems like.
Well,
anyhow,
thank you all for bringing your decks to the table, and it's great seeing those, and great getting this out into the community. Seeing different people get really excited. I know a lot of people were really excited about the Kodama File Smasher stuff that you guys did. So really appreciate it. So thank you guys for coming on, and thank you again for joining us. And from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.